Welcome back. All right, so amongst the former NHL goaltenders who become commentators is Greg Millen. Greg Millen is a player that, I watched throughout his career, and it's fascinating. This is one of those cases where I talk about how a goaltender playing on a team that gets him a bunch of wins and helps his stats can make him look better, and how a goaltender playing on a team that isn't very good, it can drag their stats down. For Greg Millen, a guy who really wanted to have that Stanley Cup ring, he didn't end up getting that Stanley Cup ring, but he had some very good seasons along the way. So we'll go through this. He was a number 102 pick of the Pittsburgh Penguins in 1977. Debuts for them in 78-79, plays 28 games, has a record of 14-11-1, 888 save percentage. I've put in goals against average in this one because I think goals against average here shows that why I don't use it very often. So 3.38 goals against average for him that season as a rookie. 79-80, plays 44 games, still with the Pens. 18-18-7, 881 save percentage. 3.65 was the goals against average. In the playoffs, 5 games played, 2-3 record. This is back when it was a best of 5 in the first round rather than the best of 7 we have now. 868 save percentage in the playoffs, 4.20 goals against average. So his numbers, not fantastic to this point, but again, it's the Penguins. The Penguins, before the arrival of Lemieux, well, there were some issues in Pittsburgh. 80-81, he played 63 games that year. That was third overall in the NHL. 24 wins, which is fourth. The 27 losses led the league. 10 ties, 864 save percentage, 4.17 goals against average. So you can see his goals against average goes up, his save percentage comes down, but there are other seasons where you'll see the save percentage go up and the goals against average come down. And it's one of those things that just kind of drives me nuts at this point in time. But in 5 games in the playoffs that year, he goes 2-3. So again, they lose in 5. They lose against St. Louis, who were the great favorites that year. St. Louis, 80-81 was quite the year for Mike Liut and the Blues. But he held his own. He ended up with an 893 save percentage and a goals against a 3.51. But even though he was considered to have given them a heroic performance in the playoffs, they let him become a free agent. He signs with the Hartford Whalers on June the 15th. And that first year in Hartford, he plays 55 games. John Garrett was his battery mate there as well. So he played well in Hartford. The problem was it was in Hartford. 11 wins, 30 losses, which is second overall, and 12 ties. Hartford was bad. Hartford was just bad. 873 save percentage, 4.30 goals against average. And playing in Hartford will not help your numbers, as 82-83 shows. 60 games played, which is fourth overall, 14 wins, 38 losses, which is first overall in the NHL, and 6 ties. 863 save percentage, 4.82 goals against average. And for a player in Greg Millen who wants to compete for a cup, it had to be difficult. It had to be difficult those years with the Whalers. And I've often thought that for some of these guys that end up making really good analysts, it's stuff like this that makes them a really good analyst. I think it's anybody who's, just had a pretty easy time of it, always been on good teams. I think you have a different experience. You view the NHL a little differently than the guys who had to play for the Hartford Whalers in the 80s. 83-84, 60 games played, which was first overall in the NHL. 21 wins, so that got better. 30 losses, which is second overall, 9 ties. 878 save percentage, 3.71 goals against. But while his numbers are rough, I don't remember anybody saying that Greg Millen wasn't a good goaltender at that time. I mean, I had his hockey cards. I thought he was a good goalie. Well, 84-85, 44 games played, 16, 22-6 was his record. 855 save percentage, so that drops off in a 4.22 goals against average. He gets traded, mercifully gets traded to the Blues, a team with a little more history of making the playoffs than the Hartford Whalers at that point. He's traded with Mark Johnson, who was one of my favorite players at the time, in exchange for Mike Liut and Jorgen Pettersson. Now, Mike Liut, of course, would go on to have some pretty strong seasons with Hartford, but Millen had some pretty strong years with St. Louis as well. It didn't start that way in 84-85 after the trade. 10 games played, 2-7-1 record. So the 54 games played altogether puts him 6th in the NHL. The 29 losses, he led the league in that category again. After the trade, an 870 save percentage, a goals against of 3.5. So while his win-loss record doesn't get better, his other numbers do. He just plays the one playoff game, no wins, 1 loss there. .943 save percentage, 2.07 goals against average. So that's encouraging. It's a very small sample size. 85-86, playing 36 games in St. Louis, a 14-16-6 record. His save percentage, .886, which was 10th overall in the NHL that year. 3.59 goals against average. In the playoffs, this was a team that ends up going to the conference finals. So finally, a nice long playoff run where they ran into the Calgary Flames. Now, Calgary, of course, as daunting as beating Calgary would seem, they had knocked off the Edmonton Oilers, so it definitely made it seem like this series could be a little more even. That being said, they did lose the conference finals to the Flames. He split the games in the playoffs. He plays 10, ends up with a record of 6-3, .911 save percentage, 2.98 goals against average. He split the net with Rick Walmsley, who would be traded to Calgary, of course, and win a Stanley Cup ring in Calgary. So 86-87, he plays 42 games, a record of 15-18-9, .873 save percentage, 3.54 goals against. In 4 playoff games, a record of 1-3, .918 save percentage, 2.40 goals against. So again, it's a situation where there's 2 goaltenders. It's interesting because you can see in Hartford that they really overtaxed him. You do wonder if he hadn't been overtaxed there. If you've been with a good team, who knows, right? But 87-88, plays 48 games, a record of 21-19-7, a save percentage of .880, 3.52 goals against average. So again, the goals against stays about the same, but the save percentage gets better, and I think that's important. Record of 5-5 in 10 games in the playoffs, .849 save percentage, 3.81 goals against. And so again, he's on a St. Louis team that's able to get pretty far, like out of the first round. Conference finals, maybe, but this is an era where whoever comes out of the Smythe division, whether it's Calgary or Vancouver, Vancouver in 81 or 82 as well, and then Edmonton, right? So whoever comes out of the Smythe ends up winning in general. 88-89, 52 games played, 22 wins, which is 8th overall in the NHL. It's the only time he's top 10 in wins other than 80-81. 20 losses, which is 8th overall, 7 ties, .879 save percentage, 3.38 goals against. In 10 playoff games, he's 5-5 again. His save percentage, .890, 3.14 goals against average. Now, he's 5th in Vezina voting that year, and he really grows roots in St. Louis. Loves the city of St. Louis. Wants to play in St. Louis. The problem is St. Louis has this young goaltender, Vincent Riondo's, and then they signed Curtis Joseph. So then you're in a bit of an issue with St. Louis where you need 2 goaltenders. You don't need 3. You probably don't need 4. You don't need all this. So for Millen, in 89-90, he ends up playing 21 games with St. Louis, 11-7-3 record, .890 save percentage, 2.94 goals against average. His numbers are pretty good. But again, they have a goaltending issue. They have too many goaltenders. And we know how good Curtis Joseph is. I've done the career video on him. I put him in the THG Hall of Fame. I will put Greg Millen in the THG Hall of Fame as well because he stuck with it. He stuck with it through some rough teams. But he ends up being traded December 13th with Tony Herkus for Jeff Brown to the Quebec Nordiques. Now, this is a trade that Quebec loses. And what's interesting is they lose 2 trades with Greg Millen. But Greg Millen getting to Quebec, he was not happy at all. Now, I was looking this up before the video. I swear I remember him not wanting to report. This is part of what I think we as hockey fans forget. Nobody wanted to play in Quebec. People did not want to go and play in Quebec. Quebec was a disaster in 89-90. And Greg Millen, his heart was in St. Louis. He was heartbroken to be traded to Quebec. He did go, he did play, but it was not pretty. 18 games for the Quebec Nordiques, 3-14-1 record, .853 save percentage, and his goals against was ballooned up to 5.28 per game. Goes to management and basically says, I don't want it. I don't want this. He'd gone through it in Hartford. So he goes through in Hartford, just rough times. Pittsburgh, they were always underdogs. St. Louis, you're going to be in the playoffs every year. Quebec, there's no chance of playoffs anytime soon for the Quebec Nordiques. Not with the way they're being run, right? So he wants out. And March the 5th, they accommodate him. He was traded with a 1991 6th-round pick in exchange for Mario Doyon, Everett Sanapass, and Dan Vincelette. So I will say that Quebec lost the trade twice because Jeff Brown went on to be pretty darn good with the Blues. And then the 3 guys they get for Millen, right? So he's with the Chicago Blackhawks. Good news for him is the Chicago Blackhawks, a team that's definitely better than Quebec. Plays 10 games there. He ends up playing 49 altogether, which is 9th overall amongst goaltenders. Had 5 wins to go with 4 losses. The combined 25 losses ends up being second in the NHL that year, and 1 tie. .880 save percentage, 3.34 goals against. So his save percentage comes up by 27 points. His goals against drops by almost a full 2 goals per game. So this is why, like, you know, we've got goaltenders who are hidden gems in the NHL now, who are playing behind defenses that maybe aren't very good, and their numbers are pretty rough. And if they were with a better team, their numbers would get better. In the playoffs, he plays 14 games for a Hawks team that's really quite good. 6-6 record, .867 save percentage, 3.92 goals against average. So, you know, things look good with Chicago. But 90-91, he's caught in a log jam. They have Eddie the Eagle Belfour, who plays 74 games that year. The net is mine, says Eddie the Eagle. Jacques Cloutier was the official backup. Dominic Hasek was in the organization. So Greg Millen doesn't see the net very much. Plays in 3 games in total. Only has the 1 loss on his record. .875 save percentage, 4.13 goals against. And so he's kind of stuck, right? He's wanting to play. Chicago's playing quite well, but he's not really part of the picture. So September 24th, 1991, he's traded to the New York Rangers for future considerations. New York Rangers are having discussions with Mike Richter and having problems signing Mike Richter. So they brought in Greg Millen in case they needed to have a solution for the Mike Richter situation. Richter, of course, would sign. So December 26th of that year, he's traded to the Detroit Red Wings by the New York Rangers for future considerations. I would like to say the future considerations being traded twice for the same player in that small of an area, small of a time frame. I don't know that I've seen that before in a career video. I'm sure it's happened before, though. So he plays 10 games with Detroit, has a 3-2-3 record, .896 save percentage, 2.71 goals against. Basically, Detroit at this stage is trying to find anyone who can back up Tim Shovelday, and Millen does a decent enough job of it. But that would be his final season. He ends up playing 694 games, 215 wins, 284 losses, 89 ties, .873 save percentage, 3.88 goals against in 59 playoff games, a record of 27-29, .885 save percentage, and 3.43 goals against. So save percentage is better in the playoffs than in the regular season, which tells you 2 things. 1, he likely had better numbers with the playoff teams, and 2, if it was an important game, he was a good player for that. Good goaltender. And again, I'll put him in the THG Hall of Fame, and he's become a broadcaster that, you know, I will say this. I used to get irritated with Greg Millen. I remember when he first started as a broadcaster being irritated, and now I'm actually happy when I hear Greg Millen. I'm like, oh, okay, Millen's the color commentator. This is going to be great. I put him up there with guys like Panger, with Mickey Redmond. I think it was just, you know, him getting used to it. And he's not the only one. We've seen that where a guy will come in and do the play-by-play, has a rough time of it. We've seen that with color commentary as well, where you're like, wow, that's some really awkward color commentary. But he got the hang of it pretty quickly. Seems like a very affable guy, decent guy, and I always kind of felt bad for what happened to him with the Quebec situation because, yeah, again, nobody wanted to go to Quebec, and you could tell that was really hard for him. But I think he's got things pretty good right now. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.